a new addition to your home video collection from the Weather Channel.
A special presentation from the Weather Channel. The hurricane season of '95 was truly a season on edge. 19 named storms from Allison to Tanya, the most active tropical season in 62 years. Join us as we show the storms through the eyes of those who were directly affected. See the video from those who were caught in the storm's eye and hear their frightening stories of survival in the face of a hurricane.
I can't believe it.
Oh, my God. Who's in trouble now, boy?
The wind started blowing much harder. Pressure felt so low that our ears began to block, and we couldn't breathe. And then there was a tremendous explosion, and every glass, shutter, louver, every piece of furniture, no matter what the size, no matter how heavy, went flying around the house. We really felt that we were going to die.
The only covering we had was the shower curtain, which we put over our heads for the 6.5 hours as the roofs began to fly over our heads, as the doors busted open, as the wind was going through the bathroom. And we were frightened beyond words.
Words were hard to find for many who lived through the 1995 hurricane season. It was a near-record season with 19 named storms, 11 of which became hurricanes. It was the season that brought Hurricane Opal, the worst hurricane to hit the United States since Andrew in 1992. And it was a season that saw storms cause over 50 deaths and billions of dollars worth of damage in the U.S. and the Virgin Islands alone. Why was the '95 season so active? Long before this year's tropical waves began to form off the coast of Africa, there were indications that it would be an active tropical season. Certain pieces of the meteorological puzzle had come together. The high-altitude winds, which circulate the equator at 60 to 70,000 feet, switch to a westerly direction. When these winds prevail from west to east, the chances of getting Category 3, 4, or 5 hurricanes double. Another factor, the El Nino, showed signs of relaxing. This allows potential storms to develop without being blown apart by winds. Another piece fitting into the puzzle was the increased rainfall in Western Africa from August to November of 1994, as well as the summer of '95. Also, the atmospheric pressure at sea level in the Caribbean was below normal. The last piece of the puzzle taken into account by forecasters was that sea temperatures in the eastern North Atlantic were warmer than in recent years, in some places by over 3 degrees Fahrenheit.
The global signals are there. We should not, we're not going to have a season like last year, I can say that. It just won't happen. We'll have a much more active year than last year.
Certainly busier than 1994, when there were only 3 Atlantic hurricanes, 2 of which formed in November, a very unusual occurrence. On May 31st, the National Hurricane Center in Miami moved into new headquarters on the Florida International University campus. The next day, the officials started the '95 season. They introduced their new director, Dr. Bob Burpee, who had replaced the retiring Dr. Bob Sheets. Even while Dr. Burpee was facing the media spotlight, his hurricane forecasters were watching an interesting tropical system.
I mean, I just picked this out pretty objectively on my own, just looking at it, and then Litzkian pointed it out to me here, and now it's the one that he was tracking, the system that he's tracking now, the one that in fact is in the Western Caribbean.
Activity in the tropics is unusual in early June. The last storm to develop and strike the U.S. in the first 2 weeks of June was Hurricane Alma in 1966.
Yeah, that one there in the Pacific, and then this one is, of course, the one we're we're looking at more carefully now, which clearly looks now like it's a closed surface circulation, at least on the surface data, but very weak.
The hurricane specialist pored over information from satellites and ship observations.
What do you think of that stuff? You think it looks, yeah, it does.
As the storm developed, it began to track to the north and was upgraded to a tropical storm on Saturday, June 3rd. The first storm of the season. Its name, Allison. Nobody could predict for sure where the storm was headed, but Panama City was among the early favors for a visit from Allison. The Emergency Management Operations Center in Bay County, Florida, where Panama City is located, became a beehive of activity as local agencies watched the storm. By Sunday, they were dealing with a hurricane.
Pressure's holding.
That's a good sign. That's one.
Yeah, at least it's not dropping.
Has it picked up momentum? It's down to 14 now.
Right.
Slowed down. That's not good. That's not good.
By 10 p.m., the briefing takes on a new sense of urgency as officials examine the latest information from the National Hurricane Center.
Come ashore a little bit west of the original track, which basically puts it in the Panama City area. All of you that's been here before and knows the strike probability chart, we now are #1 strike probability at 71%, with Apalachicola being at 70%.
All emergency efforts are coordinated in one room to ensure a smooth preparation and possible evacuation from the impending storm.
Down there, we've got some reports of late evening surfers and, jet ski activity, but we pretty well got that off the water now, so I think we're going to be all right till earlier in the morning. Please drive.
David Miller, Director of Public Safety for Bay County, addresses the local media every 30 minutes to keep residents up to date.
Yes, what kind of time frame do people have before they have to make a decision on evacuating?
In all actuality, if they haven't made that decision at this time, it's getting pretty late in the time frame to look at that. Anybody that needs to do that needs to do that within the next 2 hours.
As the minutes tick by, and as the storm edges closer, new problems arise.
At the special needs shelter at the First Baptist Church, we have 76 patients in there. There are 50 public health staff and their families, and there are 20 shelter workers in that facility. That's getting fairly filled, so we've got a problem there. We're going to have to sort out, I'm afraid, before the night's over.
The shelters fill up quickly. Most of the occupants don't want to spend a night away from home, but they realize it's for their safety. Across the street at the Operations Center, authorities have done as much as they can. Now they just have to sit, wait, and watch.
You get a good idea why we have not experienced hurricane force wind here as of yet, but we're still getting an occasional squall.
Everyone right now seems to be cooperating. I think they realize that there is a chance for potential disaster here, and they're heeding that warning.
While many residents are evacuating, news crews from around the country are descending on the Florida Panhandle, waiting for Hurricane Allison.
Highway 98 between Panama City and Mexico Beach, as you make your way towards Apalachicola, is closed because of water up over the roadways.
But as TV crews and emergency management officials await the storm in the early hours of Monday morning, Allison moved slightly to the northeast. This is great news for the people of Bay County.
Over the next hour, we're expecting an intermediate update from the Hurricane Center, and at that time, there is the possibility that they will downgrade this to a tropical storm.
Just as residents of Panama City learned that it was safe to go home, Allison made landfall just east of Apalachicola, Florida at 11 a.m. Nearly 6 feet of storm surge flooded the bay, but most of the area escaped any serious damage. Allison left a minimal but ominous mark along the Florida Panhandle, from Mexico Beach east to Horseshoe Beach. Cleanup crews moved in quickly to clear away debris from the storm-damaged roads.
Last night was actually, it was a little breezy. It was not real bad. It's not anything like we expected it to be to start with. And this morning, between 8 and 10 is when we really got the worst of the weather, high water wind.
The worst of it, though, was not as bad as in some past storms. This time, only the beach road was washed away. Minimal damage is a blessing, but officials worry that Allison could give residents a false sense of security.
When you make the decision to ask people to leave their homes, the comfort of their homes or the hotel or wherever they're staying, their temporary lodging, and they leave and they make the sacrifice, and then there's no reason for them to leave, the next time they question you even harder. So I think you're correct in assuming that people may be reluctant. God forbid that we'll have more storms this year, but the predictions are that we will. And later in the year, it may be a little more difficult to get people to leave in a timely fashion.
Prophetic words for the first week of June 1995. Residents along the Florida Panhandle could, for now, get back to their lives. The season had just begun, and they had no idea what was in store for them.
Bob Murphy, the director of the National Hurricane Center. Tropical storm Erin is a very strong tropical storm with maximum winds of 70 miles an hour. It is about 365 miles to the east-southeast of Miami and heading toward the South Florida area.
It was July 31st. Anticipation and anxiety were intense. Erin, the fifth named storm of the 95 season, bore down on an area where the memory of Hurricane Andrew still replayed horrific scenes in the minds of many. Media from South Florida descended on the Hurricane Center in an all-out effort to give the latest information to a concerned public. Forecasters deliberated and agonized over the storm's next move.
It might be a little further west, also might be a little further south, but that's my best guess on it right now.
While forecasters kept an eye on the storm, precautions were taken outside the building just in case Erin made landfall in the Miami area. Hurricane Andrew had nearly made a direct hit on the old center. In an office in the main building, the latest information from the Hurricane Hunter planes, which fly directly into the storm's core, was being received. At 7:50 p.m., hurricane specialist Ed Rappaport analyzes their latest report, just in time to issue the much-anticipated 8 o'clock advisory.
It looks like we maybe even have an eye forming. She's got pretty good radar.
The Hurricane Hunter's report shows that Erin's air pressure has held at 992 millibars, and the winds have not increased enough for the system to be upgraded to a hurricane. Rappaport discusses the new advisory with Jerry Jarrell, Deputy Director of the Hurricane Center, who is about to give an update to the waiting throng of media. The most frequently asked question of the night: is Erin gaining strength and will it become a hurricane? Over the next 2 hours, forecasters examine the latest information. At 9:45 p.m., the plane sends the latest particulars on Erin's position.
I think this will probably tilt his hand.
Rappaport now works on the 11 o'clock advisory. The media gather to see if Erin has reached hurricane status. The advisory is made available just in time for the 11 p.m. live update.
At 11 p.m., Tropical Storm Erin has been upgraded to Hurricane Erin and is about 340 miles east-southeast of Miami and moving west-northwest at about 10 miles per hour.
Erin is now the second hurricane of the season. And the big question becomes, where is it headed? The forecasters and hurricane specialists work around the clock, tirelessly examining each piece of information. In the early morning hours, the hurricane hunters report in with the latest data.
Okay, pressure's continuing to go down. Winds are still out of the south. Okay, it's starting to fall off. Sustained probably about 75 to 80, somewhere in there.
Forecasters debate the latest details and try to agree on a projected track.
So we can share the concern with the state on the conference call that it has gone to the northwest. We think
Erin's jog spares South Florida and Miami, but the hurricane is still moving towards central Florida. One area at risk now is Vero Beach. Concerned residents start calling the local Emergency Management Operations Center.
No, the only thing we would highly recommend to everyone is that they have their storm preparation complete by 6 p.m. this evening.
Local officials discussed the updates from the National Hurricane Center.
Okay, it looks like it's going to 78% here between Fort Pierce and Palm Beach, which means it may go a little bit to the south of us. So it's showing a more westerly turn now, still at 85 miles per hour. So we're still right in the middle of it.
Back in Miami, they keep track of significant developments.
90 to 100 knot winds within these individual bands there.
Yeah.
So this thing's coming around real fast.
By 11 p.m., it's almost certain that the storm is going to make landfall close to Vero Beach.
Within the next 30 minutes, things are really going to start picking up, and we expect that it'll last probably a good 4 or 5 hours with the high winds, the tremendous rains, and then we'll start to level off a little bit as the center moves across Indian River County.
The eye of Hurricane Erin is moving onshore in Vero Beach.
Erin was a minimal hurricane with winds of 85 miles an hour, and Vero Beach was spared the true wrath of a major hurricane. Damage was light in the area, some downed trees and many power outages. Out in the Atlantic Ocean, it was a different story, however, as the Coast Guard rescued 8 crew members of a gambling ship that had sunk in Erin's swollen seas. 3 members drowned when the ship sank just off Port Canaveral, Florida. The ship, ironically, had put out to sea rather than take the brunt of the storm in port. Along the central coast of Florida, residents began to clean up as Erin, now downgraded to a tropical storm, moved across the state and out into the Gulf of Mexico to pose a threat to areas along Florida's northern Gulf Coast. The big question now, where would the second landfall take place?
But if it makes landfall again, it could be the Florida Panhandle later on today into early this evening. So we'll have to continue to watch Tropical Storm Erin. The good news is
within 30 hours of the storm's hit on the east coast of Florida, Erin took aim on the Florida Panhandle. Picking up strength over the warm Gulf waters, it regained its hurricane-force winds.
The center of the eye of Hurricane Erin is moving onshore along the coast of the Florida Panhandle, the western part, just to the east of Pensacola.
I've been here for almost 36 years, and I've never seen a hurricane land directly here in the Pensacola area. I think the magnitude of energy that this storm is able to generate is indescribable unless you actually see it.
But Pensacola was the target, and on August 3rd, Erin made its second landfall as a Category 1 hurricane with winds at 85 miles an hour. The eye, 20 to 25 miles wide, took more than an hour to pass over Pensacola.
Holy cow, there went the clubhouse. So the clubhouse roof just peeled off.
As the backside of the storm swept through Pensacola, the Escambia County officials began preliminary damage assessments.
This whole place is about ready to go.
I'm real happy at this point that we haven't had any reports of any serious injuries or certainly fatalities, and I hope that that continues when we get out to Pensacola Beach.
When authorities got back to the beach area, they found numerous structures damaged by high winds. They also discovered some people who had ridden out the storm.
Things just started flying. The back of our deck has a roof over it. Turns out that I believe it was a tornado that made a path across the beach. Picked up our roof and threw it over our house. We saw it come over our house from the window. Saw our roof coming. So that was kind of strange. You know, just pray to God that, you know, that you continue to be all right. And sure enough, we were so lucky. 2 houses down, the house is demolished. Demolished.
Erin, in its 5 days as a hurricane, made landfall twice in Florida, killing 6 people. At its strongest, Erin had sustained winds of 85 miles per hour. It was the first hurricane in 69 years to hit Pensacola. Residents hoped it would be another 69 years before they saw its like again. Unfortunately, the hurricane season of '95 had more in store for them.
As of noon today, we issued a mandatory evacuation order for all residents of Dare County. We are encouraging our residents and our visitors to leave Dare County immediately because of the approach of Hurricane Felix.
Felix had brushed past Bermuda as a Category 4 hurricane. Downgraded to a Category 3, it moved toward the North Carolina coast. It, and the order to evacuate, could not have come at a worse time. Thousands of tourists crowded the Outer Banks. As storekeepers boarded up their businesses, the visitors began the frustrating task of evacuation.
Yeah, it's a good thing. I wish that they had 3 lanes open, but, you know, it's your vacation. You save all year, and you're really looking forward to it, but it's your life, so it's better to go. You never know when something like that can happen.
Evacuation is an arduous process on the Outer Banks. Like many barrier islands, roads are few, and cars were bumper to bumper. The emergency management officials have learned, however, that early warning in daylight hours provides people with enough time to leave.
In years past, you could wait and see how bad it was going to get, and you had the confidence that you could get off. But with the traffic the way it is now, we just decided not to take any chances. A Category 1 storm is not the worst that it could be. We know that, but with a lot of family here, we're just not going to take a chance. We'll be back in a couple of days and finish out our vacation.
By Wednesday, August 16th, Felix was perched 150 miles off Cape Hatteras. The last people to leave the area steered through high water on Highway 12 as the storm surged over protective sandbags. Local radio station WNHW broadcast around the clock, keeping listeners informed of the storm's latest developments.
Actually, we do have some more information. Members of the state emergency response team have mobilized personnel and equipment from across the state to be ready when Hurricane Felix decides what exactly it is it's going to do. This information just in: Highway 12 south of Kitty Hawk is now closed to all traffic.
The Outer Banks were ready for Felix, but was Felix ready to strike? It continued to hover along the coastline. Although most people took heed of the evacuation orders, some did elect to stay. Those who did grew less cautious. The Kitty Hawk Lifeguard Patrol reminded them that swimming and surfing conditions were dangerous.
Conditions are pretty rough right now. This wind is blowing these waves in so fast and so hard. There's not a whole lot of beach left, and I'm watching for swimmers if there are any in the water. Haven't seen any yet. But the waves are coming in so hard and strong, it would be difficult to get out anyway.
They patrolled the beaches, hoping to prevent people from going into the dangerous surf.
You aren't going swimming, are you? Oh, yeah. Well, don't think too hard about it.
The power of the ocean can be immense. Locals witnessed that power just a year earlier when Hurricane Gordon ripped to pieces oceanfront homes in Kitty Hawk. While Barrier Island residents anxiously monitored Hurricane Felix by radio, Air Force Reserve units known as the Hurricane Hunters monitored the storm from the air. Their mission? To fly into the eye of the storm and send reports back to the National Hurricane Center. Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi deployed 4 C-130 planes and their crews to Warner Robins, Georgia, to fly the Felix mission.
I think what they're going to want us to do after we go 200 miles to the north is to parallel the coast down to a point west of the storm before we enter in.
So what are they saying? That's only about 150 miles off these Barrier Islands then?
About, yeah.
In a normal hurricane mission, 4 planes, each with a 6-member crew, rotate throughout the duration of the storm. Each plane spends 6 hours in the storm's environment and penetrates the eye 4 times. 1 time each from the north, south, east, and west. The C-130 Hurricane Hunter flies to a point off the North Carolina coast and then makes a beeline for Felix's eye.
Okay, heading looks good. We're starting to paint the eye really well on radar now. Very good, very good.
Observations are recorded every 30 seconds.
We're inside, this is it. Winds 265, 270, 8 knots of wind. You see a big open space. Good job. All right. It's wide open to the east, Doug. Okay. All right, 8 knots of wind, 7 knots. Pressure's 967.9. Stand by to mark. And we're gonna mark it now.
Every 10 minutes, the plane transmits 20 observations, which include temperature, pressure, dew point, and maximum winds to the National Hurricane Center. This allows the forecasters to write new advisories on the storm's position and strength.
That point right there in the center where the crosshairs are is where we last fixed the storm.
180 miles from Nags Head, North Carolina, the crew prepares to go into the eye once more. As they enter it, the winds in the center decrease.
All right, wind speed's down to 10 knots. We got a broad center here. Oh, here it is, off to the right. You got it? Yeah, look off to the right. Yeah, there you go. That's what I want you to do, is fly right over that center, okay? We're going to mark again. 969. Well, good news for the East Coast. Mark it now. What we've noticed over the 4 different mixes during this mission is that Felix is beginning to fill ever so slightly. We're seeing a 1 millibar increase in pressure, but we have seen 78 knots of wind in the East Quad, so this thing is still very much a hurricane and very much a threat.
The C-130 then headed back to Georgia, completing one of the 24 missions the squadron flew during Hurricane Felix. As Felix continued to stall off the Carolina coast, people began to question whether they could return to their homes and whether the media had overplayed the event.
If people want to know, well, do we overreact? Well, what if we weren't here? You know, what if people didn't take these precautions and it hit? Then we'd be blamed for negligence. And, you know, that's why you've got to come out, because you just don't know what it's going to do.
Felix teased the residents of the Atlantic coast region for 4 days, but in the end, Felix produced minimal damage. High surf associated with the storm caused erosion and some property damage to beach communities, from North Carolina to the Long Island shoreline.
Hurricane Felix continues to drift slowly to the north at about 150 miles off the coast of North Carolina, posing no immediate threat to the Outer Banks. Based on this information, the Dare County Control Group has lifted the state of emergency declared on August 15, 1995.
Felix eventually drifted away from the East Coast, and by the 3rd week of August was no longer a threat. Now the season was really heating up. By August 28th, 4 named storms, Umberto, Iris, Karen, and Luis, were out in the Atlantic all at once. The first time this had occurred since September 12, 1971. The 95 hurricane season was at its halfway mark, and already there had been 12 named storms, making it one of the most active seasons in recent memory.
Lots of times we follow these tropical waves across, about 100 of them each year, and almost none want to develop. But in this, just a couple weeks here, or less than 2 weeks even, just about every tropical wave that we have seen emerge from the African coast has developed into a tropical storm.
During the last week of August, 4 storms were churning in the Atlantic. One of the 4, Luis, was destined to become the first real destructive hurricane of the season. Luis had formed off the coast of Africa, and within 48 hours had reached hurricane status. The storm tore through the Leeward Islands with winds in excess of 120 miles per hour, destroying hundreds of homes in the island paradise, Antigua. Early Tuesday morning, September 5th, as Antigua was taking the brunt of the storm, thousands of tourists on the neighboring island of St. Martin were preparing for Louis' arrival. Jim and Lisa Prom of Woodbury, Minnesota, on vacation with their young daughter Megan, kept a video diary of the storm as it swept through the island.
They're boarding up.
Louis' first signs appeared as windswept waves started crashing onto the sandy beaches. Hurricane Louis, still some miles away, was now a Category 4 storm, with winds sustained at 140 miles per hour. As the day wore on, the storm edged closer.
The hurricane moving past Antigua, or the eye actually moving towards St. Martin, north-northeast. Winds clocked at 140 miles an hour. We're just getting the first outer edge of the hurricane as I speak.
By afternoon, satellite images from the storm showed it bearing down on St. Martin.
Oh, man. Got some damage. Wind's got to be in excess of 100 miles an hour. Here comes some big wave. Here comes a big wave. See that one coming in? That's a big wave.
The winds and seas increased as time ticked by.
Oh, man. The roof just blew off. That building over there. And the surf's eating it up now. Bound to have more damage here.
By early evening, the eye passed over St. Martin. The winds changed direction and began to blow directly at the Prom's resort.
Now we've got the 140-mile winds coming at us. I'm looking through a pane of glass. It's about ready to blow. I think I'm going to get back.
At this point, Jim Prom retreated with the rest of his family to the safest room in their hotel, the bathroom, waited for the storm to pass. As the Proms were going through their ordeal on land, another tourist, William McQueen, was riding out Hurricane Louis on a boat in the St. Martin Bay.
He's in trouble now, boy. Well, the big one missed him. Boy, is he lucky.
By the storm's end, hundreds of boats lay strewn along the beaches and roadsides. At least 6 people had drowned. The once pristine vacation paradise spot was awash with ripped-apart boats and debris from destroyed homes.
Oh my God, look at the ferry. It's up high and dry. What a wind this must have been.
Many favorite tourist spots were damaged or destroyed.
Oh my God, how did it get there? It just kept blowing further and further up that little channel.
As Louis moved away from the Virgin Islands, GOES 9, a new satellite that was launched earlier in the year, captured the true majesty and power of the storm. The hurricane season of '95 raced on. By September 15th, Marilyn became the 7th hurricane. Shuttle astronauts photographed this hurricane from space.
This is the way to see hurricanes. Never, we're hanging onto our chairs.
As the shuttle crew passed over Hurricane Marilyn, people on the islands made preparations for yet another approaching hurricane. On Friday, September 15th, Marilyn moved across St. Croix with winds in excess of 100 miles an hour, began to jog toward the tourist paradise of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The Virgin Isles Territorial Emergency Management Agency in St. Thomas tried to establish contact with St. Croix.
10-4, we can't reach them either, but the couple in the house did answer their telephones, and they're not hurt, and they have another part of the house
advise they stay put. I'd advise they stay put.
Now attention switched to St. Thomas, which looked like it would receive the full force of Maryland's might. Local police tried to help anyone who needed it, but roads soon became impassable.
Where are you located?
Hidden Valley, 394-316.
394-316. It's something you need to understand, right? I don't think the authorities will be able to get to everyone. Go to the bedroom or the bathroom and just try to stay there until this thing calms down and help is on the way, okay?
As the storm roared through, it was too dangerous even for rescue crews to be out on the road. Melody Jackson recorded the progress of the storm as she rode it out in her family's home overlooking the bay, where a U.S. Coast Guard cutter was docked.
At this point, we were hoping and praying that this thing would stop, that it didn't get into the room that we were in, because there was no place else to go. We were going through this for 16 hours. I don't know if you can imagine how that can affect you psychologically. You wonder, my God, is this thing ever going to stop? I know I didn't want to fall asleep because I was afraid I wasn't going to wake up.
Oh my gosh, this house is 205 years old. It has withstood every hurricane. Hurricane Maryland. She's one tough lady.
The early morning light revealed the full extent of damage. The large U.S. Coast Guard cutter now rested on a street alongside the bay. A terrific surge of water with waves of over 12 feet had pushed this vessel and many others onto property surrounding the bay. Not all those on the boats survived the storm. 3 deaths were reported. 80% of the island homes were either damaged or destroyed. One man had a remarkable escape in this apartment when he hung on for dear life to his refrigerator door handle as the storm ripped through the walls. Other survivors of Maryland told similar stories.
What we were hearing were tremendous winds, a whistling and a roaring of winds, and the windows here began to shake. We heard our decks being ripped up. We heard the windows being smashed. It was deafening, and that noise was so deafening that you couldn't hear yourself think, you couldn't hear anything. But if you're in the middle of a hurricane like this one, what it sounds like is indescribable. I mean, words you just can't do it. You have to experience it.
Federal agencies began arriving Saturday afternoon. Their first concern was to reestablish a communications system which the storm had destroyed. Another task was to get the 1,200 or so tourists off the island and back to their homes. Large transport planes bringing in emergency supplies left with relieved tourists.
We cannot wait. We're so happy to be going home.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's amazing to think that what we've been through, but we get to leave and go home. These people have to stay here in this, but I can't wait to go home.
The 51,000 residents of St. Thomas were now faced with the massive task of cleaning up after Hurricane Maryland. Relief workers distributed tons of food and gallons of water. The storm had devastated the island. Most people lost their homes, and electricity would not be restored for months. Within a matter of weeks, 2 hurricanes had struck the Caribbean islands, playgrounds of the rich and famous. The season of '95 had suddenly stopped threatening and had now begun to have a direct impact on people's lives. After Maryland's rampage through the U.S. Virgin Islands, it was 3 weeks before another tropical system threatened the U.S. The 15th named storm of the season, Opal, became the 9th hurricane of the year on October 2nd. By Tuesday the 3rd, residents of Florida's Gulf Coast were put on alert again.
We're talking on the 3rd of October. That is 2 months to the day after Hurricane Aaron swept through here on a Thursday morning. So that is still very fresh in the people's minds. In fact, all the debris has just about been cleared up as we speak from that storm. So we're hopeful that the public is in a preparedness mood, and we're told that grocery stores and hardware stores are hopping today.
Hurricanes are at times unpredictable, but there was even more than usual uncertainty about Opal's track and forward speed. Various computer models were having a tough time agreeing on the storm's track.
The track that we see here is actually what they call compromise of all those models. So, and this is just their best guess. So, at this point, this is what we have to go on, what we have to plan on.
Jeff, where's your landfall on that track?
Pensacola. Going right over top of it.
With so many variations in models, Escambia Emergency Management in Pensacola faced a dilemma. What was the best way to handle evacuation?
One, we give people notice, and two, we give them a formal evacuation at the time that they're not going to be sleeping and ignoring it.
By early afternoon, the authorities received information from the Hurricane Center that the eye of Opal could make landfall about 30 miles east of Pensacola. But the area was still due to receive hurricane-force winds and a damaging storm surge on the ocean front.
Based on that, I still think we're looking at an evacuation. I don't think there's any question to that.
There's a good probability that the bridge will be shut down around noon tomorrow based on the predictions.
Right. We want the evacuation to be completed by noon tomorrow, and access to the island, will be limited and will be cut off at 11 o'clock.
Condos and hotels in Pensacola Beach began informing their guests of the impending storm and evacuation.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Timmons. This is David at the front desk. We're just calling to give you an update on the situation with the hurricane. Okay, as of 10 p.m. tonight, there is a mandatory evacuation. So it'd be best if you could go into town and get her from where you stay.
At 9:20 p.m., the National Hurricane Center held an unscheduled emergency teleconference with all of Florida's panhandle counties. Dr. Jerry Jarrell from Miami gave the unsettling news.
Okay, our latest forecast has it moving at northeast at 18 knots. And our three things actually happened that increased the threat. One, the forward speed increased. Two, the intensity increased. And we are now forecasting it to go ashore right at the threshold of the Category 3 hurricane.
The alarm sounded along the panhandle. Opal was building in intensity and moving faster toward the coastline than forecast.
A tenth of a degree change from their forecast, and we're in it.
Yeah.
The storm is increasing. It's moving faster. We're going to get gale force winds by 9:30 tomorrow morning, so people should come across the bridge prior to that.
Overnight, Hurricane Opal went through some dramatic changes. From the eye of the storm, hurricane hunters reported a drop in pressure from 933 millibars to 916 in just a couple of hours. This was an incredible and frightening development. Opal was intensifying rapidly.
And folks, we are dealing with an Andrew-type storm, possibly even stronger, if you can imagine that. And one thing we did not deal with Andrew, that we're going to deal with this thing, is going to be the storm surge. It's going to be tremendous here in the northeastern Gulf. Let's get into this a little bit more. 12 to 20 feet potentially, even at the time of low tide, which we think is when this is going to come in. Let's say that it does come in western Florida and east of Mobile. You're talking about right in through here, this little convex area that's going to see tremendous piling of the water well over the barrier islands, well over the coastal highways and inland.
Pensacola Beach residents who had gone to bed thinking Opal was a Category 2 storm woke up to find out that it was close to becoming a Category 5. Evacuation orders were moved up to 9 a.m. The bridges would be shut down just after that. The mad scramble to leave began. Dr. Max Williams prepared his beachfront home for Opal's onslaught.
Well, I hope it's still standing. I think the building basically will be here, but I worry about the inside. I think we'll probably be, if it comes in like they say, I think we'll be washed out downstairs.
Even at this time, waves were pushing up onto the doctor's property. He did some last-minute checking, made sure all the furniture was well off the ground, took one last look around, and headed to Pensacola. Unlike Hurricane Erin, most people decided that this time they should evacuate. The threat of a Category 4 or 5 storm was real. But there were those who decided to stay, much to the amazement of Pensacola Beach Fire Chief Rick Ruminski.
I told them they're most likely going to get wet, and there's a very good chance that they're going to lose their households and part of their life.
At 10:45 a.m., the fire department pulled out of their headquarters. They drove past the beach for one last look before crossing the bridges to Pensacola. But as they moved north, they ran into a major traffic snarl-up. The last-minute panic had led to everyone leaving at the same time. People were stuck out on the roads with the storm rapidly approaching.
Suddenly, cars were moving 5 miles an hour, which was about 1/5 the speed that the hurricane was moving toward them. So that wasn't going to work. So shortly before noon, we advised people to get off the roadways and try to get into one of the shelters or the refuges of last resort that we'd set up. Just because the storm is too strong for most people to survive in vehicles.
With Opal at their doorstep, people sought out shelters where they could await Opal's wrath. No one knew what to expect from a storm this powerful.
Let's look at that on Doppler radar, actually. I'll show you, as John was mentioning, this first band of rain here, very heavy, but tropical storm force winds with that.
New advisories were now being issued every 2 hours as the hurricane raced toward the Gulf Coast.
Hurricane force winds, is that correct, John?
And Jill, I have a new message here from the National Hurricane Center. They have a new advisory out at 12 noon Central Daylight Time. And winds have diminished a little bit. They're down to 135 miles an hour, so at least that is good news. There's quite a difference between 135 and 150. Still a Category 4, though.
Right, that is great news. How does this compare to Andrew or Hugo, which we well know?
This is very much like Hugo. That's about exactly the same pressure Hugo had at landfall, and it's a little higher than Andrew. Andrew was down, I think, about 922 millibars at landfall.
Amazingly, Opal was losing its punch. The pressure rose to 940 millibars as the storm prepared to make landfall. But still, Pensacola was reeling from hurricane-force winds and flooding caused by Opal's heavy rains.
This advisory was issued at 5:50 from Mobile Weather, and it says at 5:40, Doppler radar indicated the center of Opal is located over extreme southwest Okaloosa County. Storm moving toward the north-northeast, 21 miles an hour, winds gusting well in excess of hurricane force, battering the coast just east of Pensacola to Fort Walton.
On Wednesday, October 4th, Opal aimed its full fury directly at Fort Walton. By early afternoon, hurricane-force winds ripped through the town. Opal struck the coast with winds reaching 125 miles per hour. The ferocious winds whipped up the surf and sent water on top of water crashing over the shoreline. Boats, which had broken loose from their moorings, began to sail down the main highway. The storm surge at its peak was over 10 feet. For over 4 hours, hurricane-force winds and high storm surge assaulted Florida's panhandle.
Stay in the car.
Once the storm passed and the waters receded, the terrible aftermath of Opal's assault became obvious.
The storm was incredible. I've never seen anything like this and never been through anything like this, and I don't think I ever want to do this again.
Boats were everywhere, high and dry in the middle of the main street, jammed up along Highway 98, stacked up in shopping malls and parking lots.
Nothing left. There's 50 boats out there. They're gone.
Across the bridge in Okaloosa County, Highway 98, it was gone, washed away by the storm surge. At the beachfront Ramada Inn, a tidal wave of sand had crushed the first floor of the luxury hotel.
3-4 foot of this is a normal 8-foot ceiling here. Now see, this is the bathroom back here. I'd say I'm standing on 4 feet, at least 3 feet of sand.
The back of the hotel was just as devastated. All of the debris from the oceanfront rooms ended up floating in the swimming pool. Even the indoor pool was a mass of dirty, sandy water. The hot tub one big sand bucket.
Now this is a 4-foot deep hot tub.
For Fort Walton, it was time to begin the arduous and laborious task of cleaning up.
It wasn't at all what I imagined. I thought, well, there's going to be a little sand in the parking lot, but that is devastating. I never expected anything like this. I've been in Florida since 1965. I've seen about 8 hurricanes, and this one in our area really amazed me what it can do.
And Opal still had plenty to do as the storm headed inland to take a devastating swing through the southeast.
If you live in Birmingham, Atlanta, Chattanooga, Knoxville, this is your hurricane too, and you will have to be prepared to lose power potentially for more than maybe a couple of days, maybe even as much as a week, because this is going to affect more than just the coastline. It's going to come right into the southeast. Remember, Hugo, what it did to Charlotte? Same kind of deal.
Opal raced through Alabama and Georgia. Around 4 a.m. Thursday morning, the storm tore through Atlanta. Heavy rains had softened up the ground, and then gale-force winds with gusts as high as 70 miles an hour swept through, knocking over trees and power lines. Thousands of people in metro Atlanta lost power for days. In Georgia, nearly 2,000 utility poles were blown down. Many people were forced from their homes into shelters. As Opal cut through the Carolinas and headed toward the northeast, the storm proved that the effects of a hurricane can be far-reaching, causing death and destruction to inland as well as coastal communities. 3 days after Opal made landfall, the 4,000 residents of Pensacola Beach were still waiting for authorities to allow them back onto the island to inspect their homes and properties. Early Saturday morning, with power lines cleaned up and some roads cleared of sand, residents were finally permitted to cross the bridge. One of the first to arrive home was Dr. Williams and his wife Lynn, who had so carefully stacked their furniture off the floor.
It's history.
Yeah.
I can't believe it.
Opal had destroyed the ocean front of their condominium. The inside now resembled a landfill. The Williams searched through the debris. They were able to salvage a few items. Now it was time to wait for the insurance adjusters.
I didn't think it would be like this. If I thought that, I wouldn't have boarded up. But, no, I had no idea it would be like this at all.
Hurricane Opal had swept away the dunes outside their complex. The beach was now completely flat.
When you have a place like this, you know that this is of course a very real possibility, and you live with that thought. I'm just trying to get in perspective. My family's we're all still alive. I got my cat out of here.
The hurricane had gutted the whole line of homes that was once White Sands condominiums. This story was repeated over and over again along Pensacola Beach as residents returned to their homes.
This flashlight isn't worth much, and we don't belong to this.
What?
That trunk.
It must be. No, we don't.
What that?
No, that's somebody else.
That's someone else's trunk.
Pensacola's beachfront homes were flattened. 114 were destroyed, and more than 1,000 had some structural damage. But as residents agreed, that's one of the dangers of living so close to the ocean.
Absolutely. I don't think there's ever any question about that. Somebody asked me, back at work, it was not familiar with this part of the world, so what's a barrier island? I said, well, that's what keeps the storms from coming on shore. And if we're foolish enough to build on them, that's my problem, But absolutely, old Mother Nature, she's going to get what's hers.
From Fort Walton to Mexico Beach, damage was extensive along Florida's coastline. The hurricane-force winds had left their share of ruin, but it was the storm's surge that did most of the damage.
We've had two major incidents here locally in 63 days, and we need to respect Mother Nature and maybe not build so closely
to the Gulf front.
All along the North Florida coastline, the report was the same. The likes of Hurricane Opal's storm surge had not been seen on the northern coast of Florida since Hurricane Eloise in 1975. What bore down on the Florida Panhandle as a strong Category 4 storm made landfall as a Category 3. Yet, Opal still caused $2 to $3 billion worth of damage and killed nearly 60 people. It was the most destructive hurricane to hit the U.S. mainland since Andrew in 1992. '95 was a near-record season. 19 named storms, 11 hurricanes. It was a season that even surpassed the hectic activity originally predicted.
Residents on the East Coast need to know that they were very, very fortunate with the kind of hurricanes season we had not to get more hurricanes, and we hope that they will be ready to take whatever preparations they need to take in future years for more hurricanes.
Sometimes, no matter how much you prepare, you might still not be ready for the eye of the storm.
My family had experienced a hurricane before. This was my first time. They had warned me what it was going to be like, but to be honest, when I went through it, it was something that I don't care how much someone can prepare you for it, it was terrifying.